I've always been interested in history, especially first-hand accounts of history. So that might be letters or even video clips of old boys talking about their experiences. So, there's even recordings from the 1970s of soldiers talking about their experiences in the First World War. And I like this type of history because I think it's got a greater chance of being more reliable. These first-hand accounts. So, if you think about people that fought in World War One, most of those died in the 1970s. 1980s, hardly any of them left. Certainly by the 90s, they were virtually all gone. I think there was this Harry Patch guy, wasn't there? Now, for me, this could just be a coincidence, but if you think about this Spanish flu, I think they could only roll that one out once that generation of people, all of them, had died off. Because, if you're going to tell a lie about the past, then what you don't want is people who actually lived through that period of history putting people right about what actually happened. So it's a cliche, but it's actually true. It's important that we learn from history so that we don't allow terrible things that have happened in the past to reoccur. So if you look at human history, what you'll actually see is time and time again instances of governments mass murdering their own people. And one of the things that I find most concerning is that there's still plenty of people who think that we can get out of the current situation just by installing a government of a different flavour, rather than recognising that the fundamental problem is government itself. Now, some of these people will say things like, "Oh, well, that wasn't real socialism," or they'll say stuff like, "Yeah, but that was then, and this is now, and we've humanity's developed and changed, and we're a lot better now. We've learnt our lessons." And I find this attitude very, very, very worrying. And it's sort of, to sum it up, it's like, because we're living in 2024, the terrible things that they might know about in the past are guaranteed not to happen, precisely because we're living in 2024, precisely because they're alive now, so therefore it can't happen. It's kind of just blissful ignorance, stupid optimism. Yeah, terrible things have happened in the past, but because I'm alive now, terrible things can't happen. So about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I read a really, really interesting book. And it was the author of the book had been to this village in a country that had been run by a totalitarian government that had constructed a police state. And what this person had done is that they'd gone and interviewed all the mostly elderly people who had been alive at the time that the government had inflicted these mass murder, genocide, human rights abuses against their own people. So the book is just a collection of interviews, individual recollection, first-hand memories of what happened during this period of totalitarianism. So there was no, please don't write about Matthias Desmet mass formation psychosis in the comments, because the book didn't go into that at all. It didn't go into why people did what they did. It was just a simple description of what happened, who did what, and at what times. But I think this is particularly valuable for the reasons that I've been saying, is that many people, there are some people rather, who actually just say, well, oh, that could never have happened, because the government always wants the best for its people, and governments would never do bad things. So there's those people, And then there's the other people who think that, oh, well, it happened and I accept it happened, but because we're living in 2024, it could never happen again. So why am I talking about a book that I read three months ago? The simple answer for that is this. So you might have seen this yourself if you live in London. It's been up on some underground stations. It's been covered in the newspapers. It's obviously been all over social media. Pictures of these posters. So you got these contraptions, let's call them, that pump out CO2, carbon dioxide, and the idea is to unalive people. And what else is quite interesting too is that these posters, they only feature people of a certain ethnicity. So obviously the inference here is that the state is intending to pursue a policy, a formalised policy that targets people of a certain race for termination. Well, that could never happen in 2024. Just think about what's going on in China now with the Uyghur Muslims and what the Chinese government is doing to those people. And of course, there's loads and loads of historical examples of this happening in the past. So what I'm going to do now is to read out quite a short section of this book. She's, as I say, a collection of personal recollections. It's very, very, very good because it gives an insight into what people were thinking at that time, their mindset. And if once you've actually finished watching the whole of this video, if you want to kind of impress the other people that are commenting, because I don't know, some people like to do that, you can actually tell me which book I'm actually was reading from in the comments. Between January and December, the government murdered nearly 10,000 people at the Euthanasia Centre. Theodore was one of them. He was murdered because he was blind. Theodore was by all accounts a happy child, closely protected by his older brother and sister, who loved to run their fingers through his soft, silky hair. They did their best to do his seeing for him, and before the increasing traffic made it too dangerous to play on the road in front of the house, they would sit there for hours with Theodore making mud pies. As if to compensate for his lack of sight, it was soon clear that the little boy was deeply musical, a gift inherited from his grandparents. His pure, high soprano voice, heard regularly in church from when he was very young, and it was greatly admired throughout the village. He would listen intently to his grandfather playing the violin. But during the height of the hyperinflation, when the family had not eaten for several days, the family exchanged the violin for a sack of potatoes, a sack of flour, and 2 pounds of butter. 16 years later, the government finally set in motion a racial hygiene policy. A policy that the government had wanted to pursue for many years, namely the systematic killing of those who were mentally or physically disabled. The leader had made his intentions obvious 10 years earlier, when he had argued that if the million or more children born each year, if 70 to 80,000 of the weakest were removed, the nation would be correspondingly stronger. Unease over possible public response to such a plan had prevented the leader from implementing it sooner, but now, at a time when the approaching war made purifying the nation's bloodline and streaming its resources high priorities. Earlier concerns were set aside. Although the organised killing of the incurably sick didn't start until shortly before the war, a law for the prevention of hereditary diseased progeny had been in force since January, years earlier. This made sterilisation compulsory for anyone judged to be suffering from a hereditary disease or mental weakness. In reality, it also included the terminally ill, homosexuals, tramps, alcoholics, the physically disabled, or anyone else the government deemed a burden on the state or a social misfit. After preventing those they considered unsuitable from reproducing, the government's next step was to kill the disabled children who already existed. To do this, the government collected data. A national register of toddlers and babies was set up, so those with abnormalities could be identified. The latter included obvious conditions such as spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, limb deformity and blindness. Epilepsy was also on the list. In addition, vaguely defined disorders such as feeble-mindedness allowed children who suffered from just about any kind of problem, however mild, to be labelled as a deviant or disabled. Registration of all such children became compulsory. Doctors and midwives, all employed by the government, were rewarded financially for each malformed child that they reported. The registration forms were then forwarded to the capital city, where they were examined by a panel of 3 doctors. Based on nothing more than these pieces of paper, government doctors decided if a child should live or die. If granted life, the form was marked with a blue minus. The condemned received a red plus. The plus forms were then sent to the appropriate public health office, which ordered the child's admission to a paediatric clinic. Once there, the victim was put in a special ward where he or she was starved to death, or given a daily dose of the sedative luminal in their food. Within a few days, the child usually developed a severe chest infection which led to death. In order to speed up the process, the children were sometimes injected by the government doctors with a lethal dose of morphine. After a lapse of several weeks, their parents were informed that their child was dead. A fictional illness was cited on a death certificate as the cause. In October, the Euthanasia project was given a pseudo-legal status when the government signed an order that gave government doctors the right to select patients who, according to the best available human judgment, are considered to be incurable and may, after careful diagnosis of their state of health, be granted a mercy death. This was designed to support the propaganda of the time that claimed that the humanitarian killing of the incurably sick was simply a pragmatic response to the war, where every available hospital bed would be needed for the wounded. The health minister at the time said, "The idea is unbearable to me at the best, that the flower of our youth must lose its life at the front in order that the feeble-minded and irresponsible asocial elements can have a secure existence in the asylum." In this way, the war acted as camouflage for a policy that was in reality driven by the government's doctrine that anyone unable to work was a valueless drain on society and was therefore living a life unworthy of life. Once the means to kill children had been established, it was only a matter of months before the programme was extended to include adults living in asylums or other such institutions. Shrouded in secrecy, the adult euthanasia programme, disguised under the innocent title of Charitable Foundation for Cure and Institutional Care, was established in the capital city. The starvation method hitherto used for children was considered too slow and likely to attract too many questions. The challenge was considerable, but in less than a year, a more efficient means of killing was readily available. In October, a number of mentally ill patients had been herded into a specially built airtight room. The doors were locked, the taps turned on. Pure carbon monoxide flowed into the room along pipes pierced with holes. The glass window in the door enabled observers, government employees, to watch the victims' death throes. It's not known how long Theodore remained at the hospital, but it was only probably a matter of hours. After their identity was checked, they were given a brief medical examination to ascertain which of the 60-odd illnesses the government doctors, had on file, which was going to be most suitable to be put on their death certificate. In Theodore's case, they picked meningitis. The government provided a short paragraph to the government doctors, which accompanied each listed illness, recommending in which circumstances it best fitted. The meningitis note read as follows: abscesses on the brain are relatively rare, and as such require a long period to develop, so that we can only consider this illness in a very few exceptional cases. It is useful, however, if any of the symptoms are already present. Pneumonia, on the other hand, was an ideal cause of death for our purpose, because the population at large always regards it as a critical illness, which therefore means that its life-endangering character will be plausible. Pneumonia can occur in every age group and in both sexes. A couple of weeks after Theodore's murder, the postman brought Theodore's mother a letter embellished with a large government logo. She took it into the kitchen to read. The message was brief and to the point. Her son, Theodore, had died of meningitis. And that's all I want to say today, so God bless.